right, you're watching live now. I'm Austin Westfall, a live look at the White House on this Friday evening, 7 minutes past 5 in the nation's capital. Let's talk about a range of White House-related issues with our friend Will Weissert. He's a White House reporter for the Associated Press. It's good to see you. There's a lot to discuss. I have in front of me a Truth Social post from President Trump talking about the idea of a stimulus check. I was just speaking with viewers earlier in the afternoon, and the most common question I'm getting related to the White House is, are we getting $2,000 stimulus checks? What level of clarity do we have on that today, Will?
Well, I think it's a really good question because we really don't have a lot of clarity. This is something that the president has talked about. It's something that the Treasury Secretary has talked about. The administration has talked about being very sort of excited to make this happen. And they say that, the amount of revenue that the government has brought in thanks to tariffs has freed up money that could potentially go to Americans in $2,000 checks. There is money that's come in on, from tariffs that is a fact. How that money might be distributed and what the checks look like is still very much up in the air. And even the president himself said something like, you'll get a $2,000 check unless you're really high income, right? And that's sort of hard to know who qualifies as high income and who doesn't. But I do think this is something that they talk about as a top priority. One note of caution is that, back when Elon Musk was working in the administration and closely with Trump with the DOJ activities to cut back the government and cut federal jobs on the size of government, they talked about revenue checks potentially, or what they called rebate checks coming back then, never really materialized. So I do think this is something they'd like to talk about, and they'd like to at least consider ways that it might happen. But where the money would go, who it would go to, what form it would be distributed, and whether there would be enough in revenue from tariffs to cover $2,000 checks to a large chunk of the country, are all questions without real answers at this point.
Yeah, the president posting on Truth Social saying, "We are taking in trillions of dollars and will soon begin paying down our enormous debt." He says it'll be a dividend of at least $2,000 a person, not including high-income people, and it will be paid to everyone, he says. But as you and I note, still a lot to learn about what exactly that might entail. Let's talk about one of the other major stories, the Epstein saga. President Trump is going to be in Florida this weekend. We do know that this has been a busy week as it relates to the Epstein saga. We had a lot of questions about the House. We had a lot of questions about Adelita Grijalva's swearing in and what her one affirmative vote would mean for the House's push for the federal government to release more Epstein files. Will, as you've been tracking this story this week, what do you feel like is the number one Epstein-related headline that we should be tracking heading into the weekend?
Well, I think it's just so interesting that we just haven't heard from President Trump very much, right? He did the bill signing on Wednesday night, but didn't really answer any questions about the new emails. Yesterday, we only saw him for one event, and he didn't answer any questions on the emails, on the new information. Today, he's had nothing on his public schedule. Now, we might see him on the lawn. He might come over and talk when he leaves for Florida, as you mentioned. That'll be in a little while here. But, he really has, laid low for the last 3 days. And that's been a sort of deliberate strategy to sort of keep them out of the public spotlight so they don't have to answer questions about this. The White House's sort of feeling is they don't really feel like there's a smoking gun there that's going to tie the president to sort of new allegations. But they tend to think that he personally is sort of annoyed talking about it, doesn't like to do it. And so they're sort of trying to keep him away from the press and having to answer these questions. The other thing we saw him do today, right, was he in the morning, he sort of said, like, this is not about Republicans and I don't have time for this anyway. I have a country to run. But then a couple hours later, he came out and posted on Truth that he was going to order an investigation involving the Attorney General and the FBI and looking at top Democrats like Bill Clinton and Reid Hoffman, a big Democratic donor, those kinds of folks. Summers, I think, from the former president of Harvard was one of the guys he mentioned, and even like J.P. Morgan Chase, right, like a bank that he said was involved in sort of financing Epstein. That's an investigation that can certainly happen. It's hard to believe that there would be new information that's going to come out immediately because a lot of that stuff is matter of public record, right? I mean, this was all known information, just as some of the emails that have come out suggesting that Epstein and Trump knew each other was also sort of already known and well established. So I think that eventually he probably will have to say a little bit more on this. it's possible we'll go through the weekend and he won't have a lot of comments to say, and we'll just continue to play this game. But I think the vote next week, potentially early in the week, could force the issue a little bit, and that would be interesting to sort of see what happens after that.
And one point of clarity, too, on the likelihood of this House effort to succeed. Do I have this right, that the House would need to pass this, then, and again, the Republican-controlled House would have to pass this, a Republican-controlled Senate would have to pass this, and then President Trump himself would have to sign it in order for this to move forward, correct?
Well, I think that that's right for the entire package. Yes, I mean what the signatures mean is that there's enough votes to basically put this to the House floor, right? And the thinking is that there might be some bipartisan support for this because the Democrats want to embarrass Trump, and there are enough Republicans that want to sort of figure out what's going on that it could clear the House. As does the other chambers, and where we'll go from there. That is certainly a good question. But this the longer this sort of struggle goes, even if there isn't new emails released and other things that don't come out right away, there's likely to be a drip 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 as we continue to talk about this and we continue to have votes and have things sort of transpire that sort of keeps this on the front burner, and I think really kind of annoys the White House and the president himself.
This is one of the posts that he sent out earlier. He says, now that the Democrats are using the Epstein hoax involving Democrats, not Republicans, to try and deflect from their disastrous shutdown and all of their other failures, I will be asking Attorney General Bondi and the Department of Justice, together with our great patriots at the FBI, to investigate Jeffrey Epstein's involvement and relationship with Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, J.P. Morgan, Chase, and many other people and institutions to determine what was going on with them and him. This is another Russia scam, the president says, with all arrows pointing to the Democrats. Records show that these men and many others spent large portions of their life with Epstein and on his island. Stay tuned. President Trump said earlier today. We'll be tracking that over the weekend. Well, let's talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is another fascinating piece of what's happening in the Republican Party as of late. There was a piece written by NBC earlier today questioning where Marjorie Taylor questions whether or not President Trump is still the America First president. Is the White House responding to some of the rhetoric that's coming out of his own party?
Well, yes and no. I think that the president spoke in an interview this afternoon a little bit to this about his sort of focus overseas, right? And he said that he felt like that was important to be, working overseas, especially on issues like, rare earth minerals and trade with China, and that sort of reflected back on the domestic values and putting America first. Some of the more specific issues that Congresswoman Green is raised, are, about immigration and the use of H-1B visas to sort of bring in skilled labor. Trump has always been a little bit less sort of hawkish on this issue, if you will. He is very much pushed for a crackdown on immigration, speeding up deportations and securing the border. But he's also said that, look, we need to bring in people from overseas to be able to fill skilled jobs, and not everybody in the U.S. can sort of fill those jobs. Or lately they've been talking about a situation where they might bring in foreigners to sort of train U.S. workers that could then fill these positions. That is something that other parts of Trump's supporters, frankly, in the Republican Party and the MAGA movement, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, have sort of objected to and said, this is not right. The American worker can do all this stuff. We don't need to bring in more workers. So I think that's a case where there's a little bit of a disagreement between what the president thinks and what some of his supporters think. What he says is, look, I created MAGA, so I know what I know what it stands for. And he also says, like a lot of presidents, he likes to work overseas. He feels like his foreign policy isn't very strong. He likes to talk about it, and he sort of sees that as advancing the domestic agenda, even as he works sort of outside the United States.
And the president, before you and I go, Will, the president slated to depart to Palm Beach shortly here. Is this going to be a simple trip to Mar-a-Lago? Anything else planned in Florida?
Yeah, I think he's going to be doing golf, and it doesn't have anything sort of on the agenda for the weekends. Not like recently when he stopped by the football game with the Commanders. Nothing on the agenda this time. But we'll see what happens if he gaggles on the plane, if he talks to reporters, if he's asked about Epstein, or if we don't see him, all weekend. That could also be quite interesting.
Sometimes we see him do a gaggle with reporters outside Air Force One. Sometimes he does it within Air Force One, and we get it after the fact. Will, good to see you. Have a good weekend.